Now.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're recording. All
Okay.
right, I'm here with Jack Nicastro, and you are an assistant editor at Reason, is that right?
That's the official title, which is a little bit of a misnomer because I'm the one who needs the editing, not the one editing others.
I see.
I'm really an economics reporter, and I write a lot about antitrust, effective government intervention in the economy, right? Effective price floors, effective price ceilings, tariffs, stuff like that. And then I also dab a little bit in AI.
So for the economics reporting, where do you get your sources? Are you reading publicly available information or are you going and talking to people here in DC?
Both, but mostly the former. The SEC provides very useful financial forms. I think they're called like 10Ks. I'm forgetting the exact alphanumeric designation. But there's a lot of great data, I will admit, provided by the government or forced to be provided privately to the government and then made publicly available. So if you know what to look for and where to look for it, you can do a lot of, I think, at least if I can be so bold, useful reporting right from the comfort of your office.
So are the 10Ks filed by companies?
Yeah, from publicly traded companies. I think it's
I
every
see.
quarter, and then there's an annual one. Yeah,
I
and
saw
it
also
has
that you
stuff like
were,
cash flow, CapEx, assets, liabilities. There's a similar form that's filed by nonprofits. So this was useful in a story I recently wrote about how the private sector does a better job delivering food aid and kind of providing grocery charity
Mhm.
than the state ever could. And so, for example, I was able to find forms submitted by like God's Love We Deliver and NYC Food Pantry, I think is the name of the organization. City Harvest is one that listeners will probably have heard of, and it's broken down very clearly, like what money is from the government, what money is private, or really what income is an in-kind transfer from private sources or an in-cash transfer. And so, yeah, if you're a nerd who likes to, you know, prowl the internet for these data, you can find a lot of insightful stuff.
I saw also that you were an economics and philosophy double major. Is that right?
I was, I
I did the
was.
same, economics and philosophy.
I think it's a good combination. And it's also why I like antitrust because, what's the first thing that happens in an antitrust dispute? You have to define the market. What is that? Well, really, that's a metaphysical question, right? What is this category? That's metaphysics.
Hmm.
Um, and then once you have that defined, you apply all sorts of economic theory and econometric techniques to figuring out, um, you know, did this merger result in reduced quality and reduced output and higher prices, some combination? What's the counterfactual? So I think antitrust marries economics and philosophy, which is fun for
Interesting.
nerds like me. I imagine you probably find it interesting too.
I actually haven't followed a lot of antitrust, but that does sound interesting. Who, uh, which are there any modern philosophy puzzles that you like to think about?
Give me an example
I guess
of
this
a
is a little off
philosophy
topic, but
puzzle.
I do like it. Do you know the Grue paradox?
Not familiar.
So, suppose you notice that all emeralds that have been discovered so far are green,
Hmm.
and you might say, "Well, I'm going to my inference is that probably the next emerald to be discovered will also be green."
Hmm.
But then you meet someone who says, "Well, I've noticed that all emeralds are Grue, and I think that the next emerald will therefore probably be Grue." And so you ask him, "Well, what is Grue?" And he says, "An object has the property Grue if it is green and was discovered before this moment, or blue and it's going to be discovered after this moment." So
Hmm.
all of the emeralds discovered so far have been Grue. Do you agree with this?
Do I agree with this?
Do you agree that all emeralds discovered so far have been Gru?
Yes.
And so then this guy says, well, clearly, if all of them discovered so far have been Gru, probably the next one will be Gru. And therefore, the next emerald that I take out of the ground will be blue. What do you think of this reasoning?
Will therefore the next one I take out. I see. Yeah. Well, I see how he got there, but he's I mean, unless there are blue emeralds in existence, I don't know. I'm not a
Hmm.
geologist, but he's probably going to be wrong. He's going to be embarrassed in that
Yeah, it seems
prediction.
like his reasoning
Yeah.
about Gru is not as good as our reasoning about green. But it's
Hmm.
kind of hard to say why, because you might say that Gru is this more complex property. But then this guy tells you that actually he doesn't know what the words green and blue mean, and he thinks that the colors he understands are called Gru and Bleen. And
Hmm.
something is Bleen if it's blue and has been discovered before right now, or green and will be discovered after. And so he says, well, your color green is just this complex property saying that it's Gru and has been discovered before now, or Bleen and will be discovered after now. So really my concepts of Gru and Bleen are the simpler ones.
Hmm. Yes, that's I'd need to think longer and harder about that to gain actionable insight. What is this supposed to demonstrate?
It's supposed to demonstrate a puzzle in um, inference and induction. It seems like there are
Hmm.
these very simple rules for induction, but then you come up with these examples that seem to violate all of the rules, and it's hard to say what's going on there. But I want to talk about libertarianism, so I
Sure.
will stop getting sidetracked
Good. Nice
and green.
segue. Nice segue.
Um, so I think that the way I see it, there's kind of two camps of libertarians. There are the somewhat more moderate, like Students for Liberty groups, and then there are the
I was part of Students for
you were
Liberty,
part of
by
Students
the
for
way.
Liberty, and then there's like the Mises people and the Mises Caucus people who I sympathize with a lot, but I have to admit they're a bit less effective. I believe many people from the Students for Liberty background recently got hired to the Washington Post and other mainstream newspapers. Is that right?
I will say that the people who have been recruited to the Washington Post, I don't think any of them were members of SFL. I could be wrong about that, but
Okay.
I will say that their brand of freedom conservatism, market-loving conservatism, classical liberalism, etc., um, they could have easily been members of Students for Liberty, and the philosophies and policies that they extol and defend are fall neatly within that umbrella. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about intellectual diversity within the libertarian movement?
Well, God, I certainly hope that it's diverse because I'm coming to you from reason. I think a lot of my colleagues here on very principled libertarian grounds are anarchists, open borders people.
Hmm.
I used to be one of those people myself. I no longer am. I'm something of a classical liberal minarchist, so more in the Misesian, Nozikian, Hayekian camp. So if there's no tolerance for pluralism and intellectual diversity, then I guess I'm a statist and I have to be driven to national review, where I also have friends, and that wouldn't be the worst thing. But I'd like to continue writing for reason, and that requires some tolerance of uh, less than pure anarchism. I would admit that
What
like pure
percentage of your
libertarian.
peers do you think are anarchists?
My peers at Reason,
Sure.
or I mean, I don't know. I don't know. We don't do a lot of intellectual uh, litmus testing
Hmm.
with that degree of precision. Everybody who works for Reason, of course, is an ideological libertarian. The exact flavor, I couldn't say, but I think the boss, Catherine Mangue Ward, I think she self-identifies publicly as an anarchist.
Okay.
Um, I hope I'm not wrong about that. Sorry,
And
boss, if
did you say
that
that you changed your mind on open borders?
Yeah, and whether a state is justifiable whatsoever.
Hmm. What made you
Yeah,
change your mind about open borders?
sure. So for me, open borders is an entailment of anarchy, and so I used to be an anarchist, so I believed in open borders because I didn't believe in the state. So if you don't have a state regulating borders, how can there be border? Right? It seems to me that
Right.
borders governed by a state are logically posterior to the existence of a state, or the legitimacy thereof is logically posterior to the legitimacy of a state.
Hmm.
So I was persuaded to anarchism by Michael Huemer's Problem of Political Authority, which I
Great
think
book.
is brilliant, brilliant. And I need to go back. I could be persuaded again to be an anarchist, perhaps, but I don't think so. And this is the reason why. He early in the book deals with different accounts that seek to morally legitimize the state. Right? I mean, the name of the book is The Problem of Political Authority. Is there a way to morally justify political authority? And obedience, content neutral obedience to laws. This is kind of jargony. Anyway,
Hmm.
um,
For those
I
listening,
encourage.
content neutral obedience to laws mean a moral obligation to obey the law regardless of the content. So obviously, you're
Right.
obligated to obey rules like don't murder people, but it seems like that is something you're obligated to do whether or not it's a law. And so
Yes.
content neutral obedience to laws means a moral obligation to do something merely because it's the law. Like maybe you're
Right.
obligated to file some form with the SEC.
Right. Um, exactly. And I would add, not to digress too far, but I would add that, I currently believe that there is content neutral. I'm obedient to laws in a content neutral way, with the caveat that if there were a law that violated some first order, very important moral prior, I'm a moral realist and a moral objectivist and a moral universalist. Okay, that which basically just means that I think that right and wrong are real, that they're the same for everybody, and that they're objective. We can set aside moral metaphysics. That just happens to be my moral philosophy. So, if there were a law that said, and you must murder an innocent person, I'd say, well, I'm not following that. But if there's a law that says you can't drive 100 miles an hour, let's say not in a school zone, you can't drive 100 miles an hour on this open highway. And I said, well, I can, and it's not going to harm other people. Let's say I can see 5 miles, into the distance. And so I'm going to do it. And a cop pulled me over, that I didn't see, on the side of the road and said, "Hey, it's very clearly marked. You can't drive that fast here. You were driving that fast. Now you have to pay us $100 or go to court." I would feel harmed, but not wronged. Um, and I think that demonstrates that I'm not a pure anarchist. And
In that case,
and this is
I might be even a little more anarchist than you. I think if I would not go 100 miles per hour just for prudent reasons. I would not want to take the risk of getting a ticket.
sure, sure, and you'd be right in my hypothetical. Um, Humor attempts to diffuse what's known as a hypothetical social contract theory. So, not a literal social contract in the fabled past, or in the real past, but that it's more of a Rawlsian argument. And I remember being persuaded by his refutation of it at the time. So again, maybe I could be again. Um, but but after reading James Buchanan and his work on constitutional public choice, I've become persuaded that if there are laws that have emerged from that are compliant with a constitution that in a pre-constitutional stage I would have signed on to, then I think I ought to be obedient to those laws. Now, there are laws and actions that happen all the time that are pretended to be compliant with the Constitution. And by the way, the American Constitution, I would say, is especially the original Constitution, is one that I would have signed on to, right? So in the American context, I am a classical liberal instead of an anarchist because, by the grace of God or fortune or whatever you want to say, we have the best constitution in the world. The Bill of Rights is a glorious document. I'm very lucky to have been born in and live in this place. Um, and so laws that are downstream of this constitution, um, I think that again, since I would have signed on to the Constitution and its entailments for how actual particular policies and statutes are determined, then I think I also have to be obedient to those so long as they don't violate the moral law.
What do you think about Well, so you said that you're now kind of a minarchist,
Yeah,
but there would be some minarchists who would still support open borders. They would say that just
sure.
even if not for ideological reasons, they would just say the cost benefit analysis shows that open borders are the best.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some reason for not supporting open borders beyond just being a minarchist?
Sure, sure. So I think that there are putatively very strong reasons to be open borders for the same reason that that I'm an economic, that I'm a laissez-faire free marketeer, right?
Hmm.
Um, Government intervention in the free flow of human capital, of people, of labor, has negative economic effects for the very same reasons that government meddling with the free flow and allocation of inputs of production and capital and goods ends up being, let's say, less than allocatively efficient. Okay. Um, so, so there's a strong economic argument, and I would recommend Michael Clemens' paper. I think it's called Trillion Dollar Bills Left on the Sidewalk,
Hmm.
for a very strong case of the free, you know, basically it's a pure free market position vis-a-vis labor. Brian Kaplan also has good work on this. But generally, I think that what we ought to do are those things that we can do. So that's like a basic principle of moral philosophy, right? If you said, Jack, you should fly to the 75th floor like Superman and save the baby that's falling out of the window, I'd say yes. If I could do that, I verily, you wrote in like the style, what is it like dialectical style. Um, Verily, Socrates, I should do that. Um, but I can't fly. So there's no content to say that I should do something if I can't do something. Um, and one of the reasons why I guess if push came to shove, I would consider myself a right winger or a right liberal instead of a left liberal is, I'm not a blank slate person. I believe that human beings have a nature. I believe that we have a psychological nature. And what I think is unfortunate um, is that human beings we're tribal. Look around the world, nations, associations, these things naturally form. By the way, another reason why I'm not an anarchist. It seems like anarchy is an unstable equilibrium. We can't have it.
Right.
Look around the world. Is there a serious geography that is not under the jurisdiction of a state? No. Okay. So we're going to have states. So now let's have the conversation about how they should be properly run. Okay. Um, because to say we shouldn't is to imply that we can, and I don't think we can. Now, that's an inference. That's not a deductive argument, okay? So it could be demonstrated that actually, under these conditions, we really can, in which case I'd update my conclusion, right? So all of these political conclusions here are loosely held and subject to a Bayesian updating of my priors, okay? But given I don't know what I've seen around the world, and my understanding of human psychology, um, it seems like a bad idea to have, especially in this day and age where technology enables at very low cost and very rapidly. It could enable, let's say right now we have an open borders position in the U.S. um, Millions and millions and millions of people from completely disparate cultures, many of which are illiberal,
Hmm.
um, come here and because of network effects and economies of scale and personal preference, they form very large co-ethnic communities, co-ideological communities um, that, frankly, have inferior values or values that are
Right.
antithetical to the Constitution and are classically liberal values.
Yeah, you
That
can't
seems,
be you can't
yeah,
be a liberal or libertarian and not think that libertarian values are superior to extreme anti-libertarian values.
right. I do think that again, I'm a moral realist, I'm a
Right,
moral
exactly. Me
objectivist.
too.
I think that pluralism, that respect for individual rights, regardless of sex, sexuality, you can see where I'm going here, right?
Hmm.
Et cetera. That's right. That's the moral law, and I think it would be foolhardy to allow many, many, many people to come here that fundamentally reject those values. And this is not a novel thought. This is not a novel conclusion I'm drawing. This is a problem that has. I mean, it's called the isn't it called the paradox of tolerance or the problem of tolerance?
Yes, I think Popper was I think he took that way too far. But the general idea that you can't just give endless tolerance to people who want to kill you is obviously a good point.
That's it's obviously right, right? So moreover, let's get down to brass tacks right now. Um, Under previous administrations, let's say the last one, and I'm really not a partisan, so I don't really want to perseverate too much on party affiliation here. But the preceding Democratic administration let in, again, there's good government data on this, let in many people. By the way, people that don't have antithetical values, right? Most of the illegal immigration, which is high, in the millions, several million under the Biden
Mhm.
administration. Uh, I wrote an article about this not that long ago, but I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. But it was several million people, and these are Hispanic people. They don't veil their women, they don't flog gay people to death, etc. And Americans have had as demonstrated by their election of Donald Trump and his very hardline, you know, um, deportation policies. You see what ICE is doing around the country. Americans are getting killed in the crossfire. And all this is, and as a consequence, now Americans are revising their opinions about immigration and deportation, which is good. People are updating. They're like, hey, I thought that I wanted deportation, but I didn't realize the cost would be so high and
Yeah,
illiberal.
the administration's really been doing it in a foolish way. There's
Yeah.
just no way in which the public is going to support these like roving roving thugs going around and dragging people
Right.
out of their homes.
Right. But
They could have
sorry,
like
if I could
incentivized
just
people and said you can sue anyone who hires an illegal immigrant and then run it through the legal system.
right, if I could, yeah, let me just finish my point here. We had, in a country where we're like 350 million people, we had a handful of a million, we had several million people with a very similar language. Spanish is very similar to English. It's easy to go from one to the other. I'm a Spanish speaker. I learned it in school. Who themselves, low crime rates. Alex Narasta, David Beer have, done good statistical work on, rates of violent crime from illegal immigrants. The crime rates are low. They're productive. They have fundamentally the same like baseline values. They're from a liberal culture. They're entering a liberal culture, et cetera, et cetera. And that was too much for Americans who voted for Donald Trump in large part to get rid of these people.
Hmm.
Okay, so I don't like that that's the response. Those aren't my feelings. But if that's how human beings, even liberal, good-natured, gregarious like Americans, if that's even how Americans respond to a few million people with, fundamentally the same values coming here, and then they turn around and elect Donald Trump, I mean, what would happen if we had open borders and we let in droves of people, tens of millions of people that really have inimical values?
Yeah.
I think a really, really illiberal I think that would take us to a scarily illiberal place. So, in the spirit of prudence and not letting perfection be the enemy of the good, it seems like we should adopt some liberal, permissive immigration system that nonetheless has some controls to avert this really scary conclusion, and it's a really bad conclusion for everybody involved, with really scary moral, implications. And I think Europe is a case in point.
Yeah.
They let in many people with inimical values, um, whose crime rates are not are dissimilar from the crime rates of our illegal immigrant population, um, with very different demographics. And now look what's happening in Western and Central Europe, and Northern Europe. I have family and friends in Sweden, so I'm kind of familiar with the Swedish situation. The rise of rightist, hard right, whatever you want to say, frankly, kind of illiberal right wing parties in places that are traditionally, and at least from a libertarian perspective, like far left, bleeding heart, to be less, I don't know, I guess to be less dramatic, like left liberal places are becoming rightist places as a
Hmm.
result of not exactly open borders, but a very, very permissive immigration policy. I think that's a bad thing. I want to keep the liberal polity classically liberal. Um, for native born people, for the world, for the immigrants that come here so that they aren't treated horribly and xenophobically. Um, so sorry, that was a really long answer, but this is a very tricky topic. It's very tricky for libertarians. It's very tricky for classical liberals.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't want to come across as xenophobic or intolerant. In fact, my anti-open borders position comes from eh, those being bedrock values of mine. Um, Plus, I think a hard-nosed, honest appreciation of human psychology and what's possible given human psychology. So I hope that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. I also think that the economic argument for open borders is not nearly as clear as it's sometimes presented as, because the um, part of the issue is that the immigrants and their descendants will vote, and so they'll have a lot of power over the country. And so there's really a transfer of property being done in addition to just the movement of labor. Like you could say, imagine there were a law passed that said that anyone can move into anyone's house. Well, in a naive sense, this would be more economically efficient because there would be people with no house right now who would be able to move in. And I guess what I'm saying is that property rights themselves are side constraints on markets. Um, like if there's not a meritocratic competition to determine who gets to live in your house, the whole point of having a
Hmm.
property right is
Hmm.
that you exempt it from a meritocratic competition.
Hmm.
And similarly, so I'm against most immigration because I think that the America, or at least the institutions of the American government, are the property of Americans. These are incredibly valuable political and legal institutions that have created a lot of prosperity. The
Hmm.
reason why people want to come here is because they want to benefit from those institutions. And I think that if you're essentially just transferring those property rights to immigrants, yes, they're better off, but um, the sum of social value is not just the immigrants' new higher wage plus the benefit to their employer. It also has to include the disutility of everyone who lost their property rights to American institutions.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say, simply put, what you're saying is, let's say, an open borders policy, in terms of its ultimate political and electoral effects, could seriously reduce total factor productivity. Uh,
Yes.
let's say.
There's a paper from 2020 that showed that even immigration like 100 years ago significantly increased redistributionist sentiments, both because the
Hmm.
immigrants retained their views and they voted for redistributionist politicians, and also because there was backwards assimilation. Some of the natives assimilated to the views of the new immigrants.
Well, you'll have to direct me to that paper because I've heard the opposite. I've heard that the influx of people that are different than the native population increases feelings of or increases negative attitudes toward transfer payments and redistribution. And I would also like to note that, let's be honest, the by far and away biggest transfer systems that we have in the US are from, you appear to be around my age, from working age Americans to retired Americans. Okay, it's Social Security and
Right,
Medicare.
right.
You
And we
know,
need to dismantle the gerontocracy. I will
that's
say,
right.
though, that a big portion of the payments to old people comes from new borrowing
Mhm,
so it's adding to a debt that's never going to be repaid. So,
mhm.
it's coming from the Social Security payments going to old people are coming from young people, but they're also coming
But
from,
they're also coming from our kids, ultimately.
well, yes, but they're also coming from everyone on Earth who holds US dollars, who's propping
Mhm,
up the
mhm,
value of the dollar higher than it otherwise would be, and allowing the US government to borrow more money than it otherwise could.
mhm. Yes, I mean you seem like I'm a sound money person too. My first libertarian internship was at the American Institute for Economic Research. So, I'm not a fan of this kind of wanton borrowing and spending and the inflationary effects uh, therefrom.
Hmm. We have, I think it's going to stop our recording in a few minutes. Are there any final things you want to say?
Well, I just a question. What do you mean by like wanting to marry libertarianism and national conservatism? And I will, before you answer that, I will say that I see myself as a libertarian and a national liberal, a liberal
Mhm.
nationalist. Right? Clearly, we've spent a lot of time talking about or having me explain why I'm not an anarchist and why I'm not an open borders person. Um, but but from a classically liberal perspective, and I think that that's totally justifiable again from a liberal, small lowercase l liberal perspective. And I'm wondering how that contrasts with your view of national conservatism, which I would say, nat cons are generally my policy enemies, not my personal enemies,
Right.
but my policy, my political. I disagree with you guys politically.
Well, what I mean is that I think that conservatism and libertarianism are really the same ideology. And I'll give you an example. I was a few years ago, I was at a livestock auction in rural Kentucky where I was living, and they bring in the livestock one by one. And so there's a guy who's bringing them in. And this guy was like a farmer, and he was wearing this shirt that had an image of the preamble. It said like, "We the people are pissed off." That was his t-shirt. I think that's a pretty common sentiment. Like you would be very not surprised to see that kind of shirt at any Republican meeting. And that sentiment has really nothing to do with Edmund Burke or Russell Kirk or all these people who are running the think tanks. The views of the actual millions of American conservatives are just that, they want to be left alone and they have these like rights of Englishmen views that mirror the Bill of Rights, that they respect other
Hmm.
people's rights to life, liberty, and property, and they don't want the government coming and interfering with their lives. And so I think that the basically I think that other than a small number of think tank people, conservatism and libertarianism are basically the same ideology.
Hmm.
If you ask people, there was a survey by the PRRI several years ago that found that libertarian people who answered in a libertarian way on about a dozen different questions were much more likely to identify as Republicans than Democrats. They were also much more likely to identify as Republicans than Libertarian Party members.
Hmm.
And now it's true that there are some think tank people like Yoram Hazony who want national conservatism to be something about trade and some other stuff that doesn't resonate with the base. But I think that there should be more cooperation between like the masses of people who call themselves conservatives and the masses of people who call themselves libertarians, because I think it's essentially the same ideology.
I hope that you're right, and I hope that people like Yoram Hazony and people that are much farther right than that um, are insufficiently persuasive and don't have a hold on our fellow countrymen. And what you're saying, it really is in keeping with the historical, ideological marriage, happy or less than, between like Reaganite and Buckleyite conservatives and free market libertarians.
All
I
right.
guess I
Jack
guess that's
Nicastro,
it.
thanks so much for the interview.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.